The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was sitting on my old friend Raymond's back porch in Tucson, watching the sun climb over the Rincon Mountains with a cup of coffee going cold in my hand. I wasn't asleep. I wasn't confused. I was 67 years old and I was enjoying the kind of quiet that only exists before the rest of the world wakes up. My neighbor Dorothy was on the other end of the line. She's 72, sharp as a tack, and she doesn't call unless something is worth calling about. "Frank," she said, "there's a woman walking through your house right now. She's got a clipboard and a camera and she's measuring your kitchen." I set down my coffee. "And your nephew let her in," Dorothy added. "He's been here about 40 minutes. I leaned back in my chair and looked out at the mountains. A slow smile crossed my face, the kind that doesn't have anything warm in it. "Thank you, Dorothy," I said. "Do me a favor and don't let him know you called." I'd been waiting 3 months for Daniel to make exactly this move, and now he had. Let me back up, because none of this starts with that phone call. It starts about 2 years ago, 6 weeks after my wife Carol passed from pancreatic cancer. We'd been married 39 years. She was a high school librarian who read 2 novels a week and grew tomatoes in the backyard and laughed at her own jokes before she'd even finished telling them. When she died, I felt like someone had removed the floor from under my life and left me standing in midair, waiting to fall. I was retired by then, 31 years as a master electrician, the last 12 running my own small crew. I had a paid-off house in Albuquerque, a decent pension, Carol's life insurance, and enough in savings and investments that money wasn't something I needed to worry about. I had my health. My mind was sharp. I walked 3 miles every morning and did the crossword every night. But I was lonely in a way that's hard to explain to someone who hasn't lost a spouse of 4 decades. The house was too quiet. Her reading chair still had the indent of her shape in it. I kept buying her brand of orange juice by accident. That's when my nephew Daniel started coming around. He was 32, my younger sister Barbara's only son. Barbara lived in Phoenix, and she and I had always been close enough holidays, birthday calls, the occasional visit. Daniel had never been particularly close to me growing up. He'd shown up at Carol's funeral, said the right things, and I'd appreciated it. But after that, he started calling every week. Then he started driving up from Phoenix on weekends. Then he started staying over. At first, I was grateful. He'd fix things around the house, take me to get groceries, sit with me through the worst evenings when the silence got too loud. He seemed genuinely concerned. He'd ask about my health, my sleep, whether I was keeping up with doctor appointments. I told Barbara how much it meant to me, having him close. She said he was a good boy and that Carol would have been happy knowing I wasn't alone. I noticed the shift gradually, the way you notice the seasons changing. Not a single moment, but a slow accumulation of small things that only make sense when you look back. He started commenting on my memory. Nothing dramatic at first, just casual observations. "Uncle Frank, you mentioned that already." Or, "Didn't you tell me that story last time?" I'd think about it afterward and wonder whether I had. I'm 67. I forget things. Everyone forgets things. But he had a way of noting it that left a faint residue of doubt. Then came the opinions about the house. He'd walk through it with a kind of appraising energy, pointing out that the roof would need replacing in a few years, that the neighborhood wasn't what it used to be, that a man my age living alone in a 4-bedroom house was more burden than blessing. He'd pull up real estate listings on his phone and leave them on the kitchen table, circling retirement communities he'd found, Warm Springs Village, Cottonwood Crossing, places with cheerful names that were still, at the end of the day, places where people went to disappear. I started paying closer attention. The real shift came about 8 months after Carol died. Daniel had brought Barbara up for a visit, which I thought was just a family weekend. But after dinner, the two of them sat me down at the kitchen table with a look I recognized. It was the same look I'd seen on my foreman's face the day he had to let 3 guys go during the recession. Concern wrapped around something harder underneath. "Frank," Barbara said, "Daniel and I have been talking, and we're worried about you." "I'm fine," I said. "You say that," Daniel cut in, his voice gentle and practiced. "But there are things we've both noticed. Little things. You left the stove on twice last month. You forgot about a doctor's appointment. The gutters haven't been cleaned in over a year." I looked at my sister. She nodded, slowly, her hands folded on the table like she was bracing herself. I hadn't left the stove on twice. I hadn't forgotten any doctor's appointment. I'd been meaning to deal with the gutters, but that's not confusion, that's a to-do list. But I sat there and let them talk, because something in my gut was already telling me to stay quiet and listen carefully. "We think it might be time to start thinking about a plan," Barbara said. Something that gives everyone peace of mind. A structured situation where you have support. You mean a nursing home? Not a nursing home, Daniel said quickly. More like a community. A place where you'd have people around, activities, help if you needed it. And honestly, this house is worth a lot, Uncle Frank. In today's market, you could sell it and have real financial security for the rest of your life. There it was. The house. It had come up before. Casually, sideways. But this was the first time it landed on the table directly. I appreciate your concern, I said carefully. Let me think about it. After they left, I sat in Carol's chair for a long time. I thought about the stove story, which had never happened. I thought about the appointment I supposedly forgot, which I had not. And I thought about the fact that Daniel, who had never taken much interest in me during the 30 years he was growing up, had suddenly become deeply, persistently invested in where I lived and what I owned. I thought about Carol, who had been an extraordinarily practical woman. She'd always said that the most dangerous people are the ones who believe they're helping you. The next morning, I called a lawyer. Her name was Patricia Ruiz, and a colleague from my old crew had used her years ago for a complicated estate matter. She was in her 50s, direct, and she didn't waste words. I laid out everything I'd observed over the past several months, the memory comments, the house appraisals, the dinner conversation, and she listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "You were right to call me. What you're describing has a name. It's called undue influence, and in cases involving real property and elderly relatives, it's more common than most people realize." She helped me update my will, create a revocable living trust that placed my house and financial assets beyond the reach of any power of attorney, and connect me with a private investigator named Marcus Webb, who specialized in financial fraud cases. I also had a security system installed in my house, not the basic one I already had, but a thorough, professional system with cameras in every room, cloud storage, and remote access I could pull up from my phone anywhere in the country. Then I settled in to watch. Over the following weeks, Marcus confirmed what I'd been suspecting. Daniel had significant debt, 2 maxed credit cards, a defaulted personal loan, and a failed attempt at starting a mobile detailing business that had gone under quietly 18 months earlier. He was living in a 1-bedroom apartment in Phoenix and driving a leased car he could barely afford. He had a girlfriend named Stacy who worked in property management and who, Marcus noted, had connections to a real estate attorney who handled estate sales. The picture became clear quickly. I also discovered something that carved right through me. Barbara, my sister, who had sat at my kitchen table with folded hands and a worried expression, had been to dinner with Daniel and Stacy 3 times in the past 2 months. Not casual family dinners. Strategy sessions, Marcus called them, based on what he'd been able to observe. She hadn't called to warn me. She hadn't pushed back. She'd shown up at my table and repeated the lines they'd prepared for her. I want to be fair to Barbara. She's not a cruel person. She genuinely believed Daniel loved me. She genuinely believed I was struggling. And Daniel, who had spent his whole life knowing exactly how to manage his mother, had fed her exactly the story that would bring her in line. But the result was the same. My younger sister had become part of a plan to push me out of my own life. I kept up my end of the act. I let Daniel believe his campaign was working. When he called, I'd pause a beat too long before answering a simple question. I'd mention misplacing my keys. I'd let a bill sit open on the counter when he visited, as if I'd forgotten to pay it. Small, careful brush strokes that painted the picture he needed to see. All the while, I was building a file. 3 months in, I flew out to Tucson to visit Raymond, who I've known since we were apprentices in the same electrical shop back in 1981. I told Daniel I was going. I told him the dates, and I waited. Dorothy's call came on day 3 of my visit. I stayed in Tucson that day. I didn't panic. I didn't drive back. I watched the security feed on my phone and let Daniel and the realtor finish their walkthrough. She measured the kitchen, opened closets, photographed the backyard. Daniel followed her through every room with the easy confidence of a man who believed the place was already his. He called me that evening. His voice was warm and slightly apologetic. "Hey, Uncle Frank. Listen, I was in Albuquerque today for something, and I just wanted to swing by and make sure the house was okay. Everything's fine. I noticed the kitchen faucet has a slow drip, though. I can get someone to look at that." "That's very thoughtful of you," I said. Actually, while I had a minute, I ran into a friend who works in real estate. She was in the neighborhood and I just asked her to take a quick look, just so we'd have some ballpark numbers in case you ever did decide to make a move. No pressure. Just information. "Good thinking," I said. "I appreciate you looking out for me." "Of course." Hey, I was hoping we could all sit down when you're back. Me, you, Mom. Just to talk about some options. I've actually been doing some research into some legal documents that might help give you some protection. What kind of documents? Power of attorney, mostly. It's pretty standard for someone in your situation. Basically, it means that if you ever get confused about finances or medical stuff, someone you trust can step in and help. It's not a big deal. It's just smart planning. That sounds like something worth discussing, I said. When I came back from Tucson 2 days later, I walked through my house slowly. Daniel had been careful. He'd returned everything to its approximate position, but I knew my home. The angle of a chair, the alignment of a drawer, the photograph of Carol and me at the Grand Canyon that was now hanging exactly 1 inch lower than I'd left it, as if someone had taken it off the wall and replaced it slightly wrong. He'd been through everything. I called Patricia Ruiz that evening. They're moving to the next phase, I told her. Can we be ready by the end of the week? I've been ready for 6 weeks, she said. The dinner was Daniel's idea, scheduled for Saturday night at my house. Just the 3 of us, him, Barbara, and me. He arrived carrying wine and a leather portfolio, which told me everything I needed to know about his intentions for the evening. Barbara had driven up from Phoenix and was wearing her concerned expression, the one she'd clearly been practicing. We sat in my dining room under the same light where Carol and I had eaten thousands of meals. Daniel opened the portfolio and laid out several documents across the table with the unhurried confidence of a man who believed he'd already won. Uncle Frank, we've talked about this before, but I wanted to make it more concrete, he began. These are some documents that would give Barbara and me the ability to help manage your affairs. Think of it as a safety net. I picked up the first document, power of attorney, granting Daniel authority over my financial accounts. I turned to the second, property management authority, giving him the right to execute the sale of real estate on my behalf. I examined the signatures on both, notarized and dated 3 weeks earlier. Except I had been in Tucson 3 weeks ago. Can I ask you something, Daniel? Of course. This notarization date I was visiting Raymond in Tucson that week. I have hotel records, a plane ticket, text messages from those days. I paused. I never signed these. The room went very quiet. Daniel's jaw tightened for just a fraction of a second before his face resettled into its practiced concern. Uncle Frank, I think you might be misremembering. You signed those before your trip. You told me you wanted to get it done. I have no memory of that, I said. That's exactly what we're worried about, Barbara said softly, right on cue. Frank, these gaps in memory. Barbara, I said quietly, I need you to stop. Something in my voice made her stop. How much does he owe? I asked her directly. She blinked. What? Daniel, how much is the debt? Do you actually know, or did he just tell you what he needed you to hear? Her mouth opened, then closed. Daniel stood up. His chair scraped back hard against the floor. This is ridiculous. We came here to help you, and you're sitting there making accusations. Sit down, Daniel. He didn't sit down. But he stopped talking, which was enough. I know about the credit cards, I said. I know about the failed business. I know about Stacy, who works in property management, and who has already been in contact with a real estate attorney about a potential estate sale. I looked at him steadily. I know you brought a realtor through this house while I was in Tucson. I have it on camera. The color left his face in a single, even wave. I also know, I continued, that these documents are forgeries. I know who prepared them, and I know that the notary seal on the second page belongs to a woman who lost her license in 2021. Barbara turned to look at her son. It was the first time all evening that she'd looked at him without the scripted concern on her face. What replaced it was something raw and harder to watch. Daniel, she said. Tell me this isn't what he's saying. He was quiet for too long. I was going to pay it back, he finally said, and his voice had changed. The warmth was gone. What was left underneath was smaller and colder. He doesn't need all of this. He's 67 years old and he's sitting alone in a 4-bedroom house with more money than he'll ever spend. I needed help. I thought, you thought I was too far gone to notice, I said. He looked at me, and for the first time since any of this started, I saw him clearly. Not the attentive nephew who brought wine and fixed things. Just a young man who'd convinced himself that what he wanted was the same as what was fair. The house alone would have solved everything, he said, almost to himself. Daniel. Barbara's voice was barely above a whisper. This is your uncle. Carol just died. She just died. I know when she died. You came to her funeral, and then you started. She couldn't finish the sentence. I had asked Patricia to arrive at 7:30. It was 7:29 when the doorbell rang. She came in with a colleague and a gentleman named Detective Harmon from the Bernalillo County Sheriff's Financial Crimes Unit, who had the comfortable, unhurried manner of someone who'd done this many times before. Daniel's face went through several expressions in rapid succession when he saw them. Patricia set her briefcase on the table next to Daniel's leather portfolio. "Mr. Kowalski," she said to Daniel, "I represent your uncle in matters concerning his estate. I'd like to discuss the documents you brought this evening." "I want a lawyer," Daniel said. "That's your right," Detective Harmon replied. "But I should let you know we've already spoken to the individual who prepared these forgeries. He's been cooperative." Daniel sat back down, slowly, like something had gone out of him. Barbara had her hands over her mouth. She was staring at the documents spread across the dining room table, Carol's dining room table, where we'd had Thanksgiving and birthday dinners and long Sunday mornings with coffee and newspapers, and I could see the full weight of what she'd almost helped happen landing on her all at once. "Barbara," I said, "I don't believe you understood what you were part of." She looked at me with wet eyes. "I thought he was worried about you. I thought." She shook her head. "He told me the doctor had concerns. He told me there was a report. There was no report. I know that now." Patricia laid out the series of facts methodically. The forged documents, the unlawful entry during my Tucson visit, the recorded conversation between Daniel and Stacy discussing the timeline for the sale, the financial trail connecting Daniel's debts to his motivation. Then she slid a single document across the table toward me, not Daniel, toward me. "Mr. Kavanaugh, would you like to explain to your family what you actually did with your estate 3 months ago?" I folded my hands on the table. "Everything I own, the house, my savings, my retirement accounts, was placed into a revocable living trust 11 weeks ago. The trust is administered by Patricia's firm. No power of attorney, forged or legitimate, can touch anything inside it." I looked at Daniel. "If you had succeeded in getting me to sign those papers, or if I had signed them without realizing what they were, there would have been nothing to access. The well was empty before you started digging." The silence that followed was the most complete silence I'd felt since the morning after Carol died. Daniel put his face in his hands. Detective Harmon made the arrest with the same quiet, professional manner he'd shown all evening. As he walked Daniel toward the door, my nephew looked back at me once. I don't know what he was looking for. Regret, maybe, or some version of forgiveness I wasn't ready to offer. "Why?" he asked. "Just that. Because your aunt worked for 39 years and raised a good life with me," I said. "And I wasn't going to let you erase that because your business failed." After they left, Barbara and I sat at the table for a long time without speaking. The wine Daniel had brought was still in the middle of the table, unopened. "I should have seen it," she finally said. "He's your son," I said. "He knew exactly what to tell you. I kept thinking you seemed fine. And then he'd say something, and I'd doubt myself. He had a way of—" She stopped. "He learned that from me, didn't he? I used to do that to him when he was young. Make him doubt what he'd seen or heard. I thought I was correcting him." She looked at her hands. "I made him. I didn't have an answer for that. Some things are too complicated for a single evening." "Are we okay?" she asked. "You and me?" I thought about it honestly. "We will be," I said. "Not tonight, but we will be." She drove back to Phoenix just before midnight. I watched her taillights disappear at the end of the street, and then stood in my front doorway for a while in the cool October air, listening to the quiet that had come back. I went inside and sat in Carol's chair. I told her what had happened, out loud, the way I still did sometimes when the house felt too big. I told her the house was safe. Her china was safe. The photograph from the Grand Canyon was back at its proper height. I told her I missed her in a way that hadn't softened at all in 2 years and probably never would. Then I went to bed and slept for 8 hours, which was the first full night's sleep I'd had in months. 6 months later, I was in the backyard pulling up the last of the summer garden when my phone buzzed with a text from Barbara. She'd been sending short messages every week or two since October. Nothing heavy. A photo of her dog. A news article she thought I'd find interesting. A joke she'd heard at her book club. She was rebuilding carefully, in small increments, the way you repair something you broke, not expecting it to look exactly as it did before, just hoping it can hold weight again. This message said, "Daniel took the plea deal. 18 months. His lawyer called me this morning." I read it twice, then typed back, "Thank you for letting me know. I meant it." She didn't have to tell me. The fact that she did meant something. Daniel had faced charges of forgery, financial elder abuse, and criminal conspiracy. The man who'd prepared the documents received a separate sentence. Stacy had cooperated with investigators in exchange for immunity, and had provided detailed records of the planning conversations, which accounted for a significant portion of the case against Daniel. 18 months. People in the comments of my life, if there were such a thing, would probably say it wasn't enough. Maybe they'd be right. But I'd come to understand that what I wanted was never really punishment. What I wanted was for the attempt to fail completely, for the thing Carol and I built together to still be standing, for myself to still be standing in it. I went back to my garden. I'd replanted it from scratch in the spring. New raised beds that I'd built myself over 3 weekends, which was slower than it once would have been and satisfying in a way it wouldn't have been when I was younger. I grew tomatoes, because Carol always grew tomatoes, and also peppers and basil, and a row of sunflowers along the south fence that had no practical purpose whatsoever except that they were tall and bright and mine. My neighbor Dorothy came over sometimes in the evenings. We'd sit on the back patio and she'd tell me about her grandchildren and I'd tell her what I was reading, and we'd watch the light change over the Sandia Mountains the way it does in New Mexico in the fall, going from gold to pink to purple so gradually you can never quite catch the moment it shifts. I was not lonely the way I'd been that first year after Carol died. I was alone differently, deliberately, on my terms, in a life I had chosen and protected. The one thing I hadn't done was call my nephew. I'd thought about it. Not every day, but sometimes. He was 32 years old, and the choices that had led him to that dining room table were made up of 1,000 smaller choices going back years. Debt and pride and the particular recklessness of someone who believed the world owed him a shortcut. I didn't hate him for it, but I also didn't trust him, and I had learned, at 67, that trust and family are not the same thing. Being someone's blood doesn't entitle them to your life, and forgiving someone doesn't require letting them back in the door. Some doors, once closed, are better left that way for a while. Maybe a long while. Maybe always. I finished in the garden as the afternoon light was going amber and long. I brushed the soil off my hands and stood up slowly, my knees reminding me that I wasn't 40 anymore, which I acknowledged and ignored. Inside, I washed my hands and put on the kettle. While I waited for the water to boil, I looked around the kitchen, the copper pot hanging on the wall that Carol had bought at a craft fair in Santa Fe, the window above the sink where her herb garden used to live in small ceramic pots, the stool at the counter where she'd sit and talk to me while I cooked. The house was still full of her. It probably always would be. That didn't feel like grief anymore so much as company. I made my tea and took it to the back patio. The Sandias were doing that thing they do in October, turning that impossible shade of watermelon pink along the ridgeline right before the sun clears the horizon completely. I've watched it thousands of times and it still makes me stop what I'm doing. I sat and watched it, and I thought about what it means to be 67 and sharp-minded and unhurried, about what Carol would have made of all of this, about the specific and irreplaceable satisfaction of having seen the whole thing coming, of having built the walls before the flood arrived. I wasn't bitter. Bitterness would have meant they won something. What I felt instead was the particular piece of a man who had looked clearly at something difficult and handled it on his own terms. The pink faded to purple. The first star appeared above the mountains. I picked up my tea and held it with both hands and let the evening come in around me. The house was mine. My life was mine. Everything else I could take or leave. Getting older doesn't make you weaker, it makes you harder to fool, if you pay attention. Frank didn't fight back with anger or desperation. He watched, he planned, and he protected what mattered most. The real lesson here isn't about catching a schemer. It's about knowing your own worth so deeply that nobody can talk you out of it. Stay sharp. Stay rooted. The life you've built deserves someone like you guarding it. A small note to our viewers. This story was created and imagined by AI, crafted to entertain you and, hopefully, leave something quietly useful behind, a reminder that wisdom and strength don't have an age limit.